Kyle wanted to keep racing and stay active. That way he could race against Brexton. To have that moment of symbolization for Kyle and just see Brexton standing there, there's a moment of, wow, he's gone. And we're not going to get him.
For the first time since his brother died, Kurt Busch sat down and talked about it. Not a press release, not a short statement at the track. A real, on-camera conversation about the final days of Kyle Busch's life. And what Kurt revealed isn't just emotional. It fills in gaps that NASCAR fans have been asking about since May. Today we're breaking down exactly what Kurt Busch said, what it tells us about Kyle's last weeks, and why this interview is hitting the NASCAR world so hard right now. Stick around, because by the end of this, you'll understand why this one conversation is already being called one of the most personal moments NASCAR has put on television in years. Quick recap, because the timeline matters here. Kyle Busch, two-time Cup Series champion, winningest driver in NASCAR National Series history with 234 wins across the top 3 series, died on May 21, 2026. He was 41 years old. His family said the cause was severe pneumonia that progressed into sepsis. That diagnosis came just 2 days after Kyle collapsed at a Chevrolet simulator facility in Concord, North Carolina, and was rushed to the hospital. He never raced again after that. For months, Kurt Busch, Kyle's older brother and a NASCAR Hall of Famer, said almost nothing publicly about it. He gave a written tribute shortly after Kyle's death, but nothing extended, nothing sit-down, nothing where fans could actually see him talk through what happened. That silence just ended, and the way it ended surprised a lot of people. For context, Kyle had spent 15 seasons driving for Joe Gibbs Racing before moving to Richard Childress Racing, winning 56 races in that number 18 car alone. He was in his 22nd full-time season overall when he died, still competing at the front of the field in a sport where most drivers his age had already stepped back or moved into ownership roles full-time. Here's why this interview is a bigger deal than a normal tribute segment. Kurt and Kyle didn't just share a last name. They were NASCAR's winningest sibling pair in history. Two Hall of Fame caliber talents who came up through the sport together, pushed each other, and spent decades in the same garages, on the same tracks, chasing the same championships. And their relationship was complicated. Fierce competitors, on-track incidents, stretches where they reportedly weren't even speaking. Anyone who followed NASCAR through the 2010s remembers the tension between them was real, not manufactured for TV. So when Kurt finally talks about losing his brother, on camera, in detail, that's not just sentimental. That's the person closest to Kyle Busch giving fans information they haven't had before, filtered through someone who knew him better than almost anyone else in the sport. This is the first time we're hearing directly from inside the family about what those final weeks actually looked like, and about what Kyle was thinking and feeling in the months before his death. Let's walk through what actually happened, using what's been confirmed, because the timeline is what makes Kurt's interview hit so hard. Around 2 weeks before he died, Kyle was racing at Watkins Glen. According to reports, he was dealing with what was described as a sinus-related illness. He reportedly radioed his team after the race, saying he needed medical attention. At that point, nobody, including Kyle himself, seemed to think it was anything close to life-threatening. He kept racing anyway. That's the part that's hard to sit with in hindsight. 6 days before his death, Kyle won the Truck Series race at Dover Motor Speedway. It was a full, dominant win, the kind of performance that gave zero indication anything was seriously wrong. On camera that day, he said something that NASCAR fans have replayed constantly since. Sight index equals 6-1. You never know when the last one is. /sight. 5 days before he died, he lined up for the All-Star race and finished 17th. Around that same stretch, according to reports, he also attended the opening of a go-kart track with his son Brexton, still showing up for family moments even while sick. Somewhere in the middle of all that, according to his family's later statement, bacterial pneumonia was already spreading through his body. His death certificate, obtained by the Associated Press, indicated he'd been experiencing pneumonia symptoms for what was described as days to weeks before sepsis actually set in. Then came May 20th. Kyle was testing in a racing simulator at a General Motors facility in Concord, North Carolina. According to a 911 call obtained by NBC News, someone at the facility reported that Kyle was short of breath, overheating, and coughing up blood, and that he'd been lying on a bathroom floor before help arrived. The caller can be heard repeatedly confirming that Kyle was still conscious as paramedics were on their way. He was taken to a Charlotte area hospital. His team announced he wouldn't be competing in the Coca-Cola 600 due to a severe illness, a statement that, at the time, didn't sound like anything close to a goodbye. Less than 24 hours later, Kyle Busch was gone. His family later released a statement explaining what the medical evaluation found. Severe pneumonia had progressed into sepsis, causing what they called rapid and overwhelming complications. The death certificate specifically listed hemorrhagic shock and disseminated intravascular coagulation as contributing factors, both of which are consistent with a body in full septic crisis. That's the outline the public already had. What Kurt adds now, months later, is the human side of it, not the medical details. The version only a brother who was there could actually tell. Here's the part that caught people off guard. Kurt's interview isn't part of a news special or a tribute broadcast. It's part of a docuseries called NASCAR Americana, executive produced by Peyton Manning through his company Omaha Productions, that started airing on USA Network this month. Nobody expected Kurt's first real interview about losing Kyle to surface inside a sports documentary about the broader history of the sport. The series itself is built around NASCAR's evolution, from its moonshine running origins to its place in modern American culture. It features moments from some of the biggest names in NASCAR history, including Richard Petty. The show premiered August 9th, right after the Cup Series race at Iowa Speedway. But the episode featuring Kurt is called Family Bonds. It premiered August 15th, and it's built specifically around the relationships that have shaped NASCAR across generations. Fathers, sons, brothers, spouses, teams, fans. That framing is exactly why Kurt's interview ended up there instead of in a straight news segment. In it, Kurt doesn't focus on stats or championships. He talks about fatherhood. He explains that once Kyle became a dad to his son Brexton, racing took on a different meaning for him. Kurt said Kyle wanted to keep racing and stay active specifically so he could one day race against his son, and that the way Kyle raced reflected what their own father had taught both of them growing up. That's a dream Kyle never got to live out. Kurt also described a moment that clearly hit him hard. At the Coca-Cola 600, the race Kyle was supposed to run just days after his death, there was a tribute held in his honor. Kurt watched Brexton standing next to his mother, Samantha Busch, during that ceremony. Kurt described the realization hitting him in that moment. He said seeing Brexton standing there made it real that Kyle was gone and wasn't coming back. That's not a scripted tribute line. That's Kurt processing grief in real time, on camera, nearly 3 months after the fact. And according to those close to the production, this was described as Kurt's first extensive television conversation since losing his brother, which is part of why the clip spread so fast once it aired. Let's break down why this interview matters beyond the emotional weight of it. First, the timeline itself raises a real question the NASCAR community has been sitting with since May. Kyle Busch was racing competitively and winning 5 and 6 days before his death. He was symptomatic for what his family later described as days to weeks before sepsis set in, according to his death certificate. That's a driver who kept performing at an elite level while seriously ill, and it wasn't caught in time until it became a medical emergency. Fellow drivers have already spoken publicly about how that hit them. Brad Keselowski said Kyle's death forced him to start paying closer attention to his own health going forward. Chase Briscoe called it a wake-up call, explaining that drivers are often too busy traveling and competing to deal with symptoms that feel off, and that his advice now is straightforward. If something feels wrong, get checked out. Those aren't just polite tribute quotes. Those are 2 active Cup drivers publicly saying this incident changed how they think about their own bodies mid-season. Second, Kurt's comments reframe how we should think about Kyle's final months. It wasn't just about racing for wins anymore. According to what Kurt shared, it was about staying in the car long enough to eventually share the track with his son. That's a different lens on a driver who was still competing at the highest level in his 22nd full-time Cup season, still chasing wins in 3 different national series, while quietly carrying a longer-term goal that had nothing to do with points or championships. Third, there's the family dynamic, and this might be the most overlooked layer of the whole story. Kurt and Kyle's relationship wasn't simple. There was real friction between them over the years, including a well-known on-track incident at Charlotte Motor Speedway that reportedly cost both of them a shot at $1 million payday. handed the win to Kevin Harvick instead, and left the brothers reportedly not speaking for months afterward. That history is public record in this sport. So Kurt choosing to speak now in this much detail about brotherhood and about Kyle as a father says something about where that relationship landed by the end. It's not a simple, uncomplicated grief story. It's two brothers who spent years competing against each other, sometimes bitterly, finding their way back to being family before one of them was suddenly gone. So, where does this go from here? NASCAR Americana is a 3-part series, and the Kurt Busch interview is just one part of one episode. It's reasonable to expect more personal moments like this to surface as the series continues airing, since the show is built specifically around the relationships and human stories inside the sport, not just race coverage and highlight reels. Childress Racing, Kyle's team at the time of his death, has already made its intentions clear about how it's honoring him going forward. His number 8 car has been temporarily retired until Brexton is old enough to potentially race it himself. Every one of the 39 cars in the field at the Coca-Cola 600 carried a small black number 8 decal in his honor that weekend. Austin Hill stepped in to drive the number 33 car that Sunday in his place. It has not been officially confirmed whether Kurt plans to do additional interviews beyond this docuseries appearance. Given how emotional this one clearly was for him, and how long it took him to agree to sit down for it in the first place, it wouldn't be surprising if he stays out of the spotlight for a while after this episode finishes airing. What is confirmed is that NASCAR has continued honoring Kyle throughout the season in multiple ways, including tribute races like the Faith Fest 250 Truck Series race at North Wilkesboro Speedway, a track Kyle was originally scheduled to compete at before his death. The bigger question the sport is quietly sitting with is whether this changes anything structural about how teams and NASCAR itself handle driver health going forward. Several active drivers have already said this incident changed how they personally think about their own bodies and their own symptoms. Whether that turns into anything formal, more mandatory medical screening, different protocols around simulator sessions and travel schedules, is still unknown, and NASCAR has not announced any policy changes tied directly to Kyle's death. Here's where I think this goes. Kurt Busch's interview is going to become the defining public account of Kyle's final weeks, because it's the closest thing fans will get to an inside perspective from someone who was actually there, watching it unfold in real time. Expect clips from this episode to circulate for weeks, especially the moment about Brexton standing at the Coca-Cola 600 tribute, and the moment where Kurt talks about the racing dream Kyle never got to fulfill. I also expect this to reignite conversation among drivers about health and burnout in a sport that runs a brutal schedule across multiple national series simultaneously. Kyle raced trucks, Xfinity, and Cup regularly, sometimes in the same weekend. He was sick for what appears to have been weeks and kept competing at a high level the entire time. That story isn't going away quietly, and it's likely to come up again the next time a driver pushes through an illness instead of sitting out. There's also a real chance we see Brexton's own racing career get more attention going forward, especially as NASCAR Americana and other coverage continue to frame him as the person Kyle was ultimately racing for. The unanswered question that lingers is simple, and it's one Kurt himself may never fully answer publicly. Was there a moment, before the collapse in Concord, where anyone around Kyle sensed just how serious this actually was? Right now, based on everything that's been reported and everything Kurt has said so far, nobody outside that inner circle knows the answer to that. If you want to stay caught up as more of this story comes out through the rest of the NASCAR Americana series, subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll be covering every update as it happens. Thanks for watching.